But welcome, Jane and Sarah Jane. Thanks for joining us. We have a small group tonight, but we're recording this so we can continue working on our library of Montessori life stories. So, but thanks for joining us, Janet.
Thank you for
You have
asking.
such a fascinating story. Can you tell us about your Montessori story? Where did you discover Montessori?
I was able to label Montessori once Philip and I had our first daughter, and we started to think about how we would like to bring her up and how we would like to educate her. And I say that because both my parents were adult educationists, but my mother had gone to a Montessori school in England, and I still have her reports. I won't say that she was frightfully interested in learning, but it was written very discreetly. And my father attended a bog standard British boarding school, but in his later years, he became fascinated with A.S. Neil's approach to education. And so he followed that with his three daughters, and very much didn't give us complete lassitude, but he certainly allowed us to make choices with lots of discussion around. But if it was a poor choice, we had to accept the responsibility. So just recently, I've been revisiting, and there'll be some of you listening who remember Françoise Hardy. Do you remember Françoise Hardy? She was a pop star in the 60s in France, sort of just before the sort of real pop music. She sort of bridged between folk and pop. And how do I know about her? So living in the deepest, darkest Africa, my father registered that I wasn't doing well in French, despite the extra French lessons that I'd been given before I went to boarding school. And so he took himself off. How he found out about her, I don't know. He took himself off to buy Françoise Hardy's records. And I'd already been listening to a lot of music with my father, mainly classical. And so we would sit and listen to Françoise Hardy in my dad's fond accent. I now understand that I don't process sound as well as other people. So poor old Françoise Hardy did not hit the mark, and I was politely asked to leave the class, and my father didn't put up an objection. So that was the sort of upbringing I had. It was very different to most people. There was no just get a move on and learn it. It just didn't happen like that. Mum and Dad always looked for ways to ensure that we could learn if we wanted to. I mean, now I wish my father was still alive, because I then recently did a test and discovered that I just don't hear those sounds that the rest of you hear. So I will never be able to speak a second language very well. So yeah. So that was the sort of upbringing I had.
Did he talk to you about A.S. Neil and Summerhill? What do you think about the Summerhill approach compared to Montessori?
Well, it would be very difficult to deliver it in a huge sort of in a factory style. You can't do that. But in Montessori style, I think even then the size of the school could make quite a big difference. But the big thing, they broke a window and they had to remove the pane of glass, and and it was secondary. It wasn't, they didn't take them for primary. And then they had to measure up the pane of glass, and they had to go and get the glass, and they were taught how to fit it and how to put it back in. And that's largely what happened with us. Is we were taught, my parents made sure that we were taught all the skills we would need to be able to survive. So Dad, in his rather facetious way, would say, I'm quoting George Bernard Shaw, I'm educating you so that you can look after me in my old age. And so that's how it went. So although he educated us, and he was a feminist, and he educated us well, we were still expected to be able to run a house and to cook. My father was an outstanding cook. My mother is still a mediocre cook. She can sew and she can knit, and she became an adult educationist in her own right. And my mother in Africa used to go off in her little car, and her messenger, who would be a manservant, and she would visit the women's clubs in all the different villages. and teach them home crafts. And that was paid for by the Zimbabwean, that Zimbabwean government, the Rhodesian government, who said, never in 1,000 years will there be a black rule. My mother went off and did that, and was paid for by the government, and wrote a couple of books on how to make toys and how to cook, all the different style of cooking with the millet and or sorghums, sorghum and millet and that sort of thing over an open stove, and cooking bread in a blackberry pot. And as I got older, I would travel with her. And I can, to this day, COVID came up, and I sat there thinking, oh, crikey, here I am running a school. I'm responsible for the education program and for making sure we cover all the laws and the OH&S and all the rest of it, which I'm competent, I can do this, but COVID, this is another level. And then I remembered my mum, and I was with her, and the school children had to line up, and I had to put, I think it was 3 drops of the pink polio medicine onto a sugar cube, and my mother made sure it went into the child's mouth. And we went all over Mashvingo province doing that. And so that sort of thing, that was my life. But I was sent off to a German convent for my high school.
Wow.
That was a wake-up call.
Yes. So you had,
even then,
your education in Zimbabwe sounded like it was quite a homeschool experience, quite a real education.
My primary years was homeschooled, yes. My father was an agricultural officer, and he traveled around the countryside surveying the lands and giving farmers advice. So we lived in tents. We live in tented camps. And so going to a regular school was not on the cards. And so I was educated by what you would call school on the air. We called correspondence school. It was only on a Wednesday morning via the regular radio, switched on the radio, and all the children who were doing this sat down in front of the radio. You couldn't speak back the way the school on the air does, but you would do all your work under your parents' supervision. So my mother, who was a terrible primary school teacher, she battled with it. She had a deal with me that as long as I did my work on Wednesday, so by Wednesday 5 o'clock, so long as all the work for the week was done, then I didn't have to do it on other days of the week. So that's what I did. I did my primary school 1 day a week. So the rest of the time I spent with adults, because I was with adults.
What did you do the rest of the time? What did you do with the rest?
Well, Mum and Dad had got rest of the time. Okay, Mum and Dad had me reading anyway. And so I was reading from a very young age, and they would have books sent in by the mail. I can still remember my parents receiving the Penguin books with the orange, the orange and the beige front. You can get them now, they're the retro books, but those were a big excitement, and all the classics were sent, and that's what they read out loud to me, and then eventually I read them on my own. I did learn to read using the look and say method, because that's how it was taught, which means that my phonics only really kicked in once I became a Montessori directress. And then I began to understand the structure of the English language. Mathematics was just incorporated in everything. If you're cooking, or I was holding the standard for my father when he was surveying, and he was explaining which dams and how big the dam was going to be and what the volume of the water. It was just in our everyday lives. And remember, in those days, Mark, we had real money. There were no credit cards or debit cards. So when we went shopping, it was once a month we went shopping, there was the list and there was the money, and you paid over the money. And that's the way it worked. And I think that's where children nowadays really battle, because everything is so abstract. I was saying, children are different. No, children aren't different. Life is different. They don't see money. They don't see the totals of money that their parents use. They don't see their parents shop. Everything's done online, and it's delivered to the door. And then it's just packed away. Nobody has to put it into another container to stop the rats eating it. Or, they just don't experience life. And I feel so terribly sorry for them. I know at Casimir, we made a big point. We were just very lucky. We were close to a post office, And so the children every year write 2 invitations, one to mum, one to dad. Well, they're not called mum and dad, Mother's Day and Father's Day anymore, but you know which days I mean. Prepare the invitations, and they would go across on an excursion with the money tightly clenched. We had to make sure we had the exact amount of change, to buy a stamp, put it on the envelope, post it. So mum and dad get the invitation. And then the great excitement, some of the parents posted the invitation back, or at least posted it into the school post box. And we never got more than 50% of the parents actually, despite the RSVP on the bottom, returning and seeing the excitement of their children receiving a letter, and understand there must be a system somewhere in the background that takes that letter somewhere and brings the letter back. So I think I was just very lucky. I lived in a simple world without emails and without online shopping and without credit cards and debit cards and that sort of
Hard
thing.
to imagine these days. Did you
Yes.
work with children as an educator when you were in Zimbabwe?
Yeah. So what happened was, once Philip and I really got our minds around what we wanted for our 2 girls, because Philip had also been educated by his mother on correspondence school, but he went to boarding school a bit earlier. He went to boarding school when he was 8, and I went when I was 12. We started to do a lot of research, or possibly I started to do a lot of research, and talk to my parents a lot, being educators. And then mum saying, well, we probably brought you up in a bit of a Montessori way, because I was educated Montessori, and then getting my dad talking about A.S. Hill. So then I started to read up and signed up with Montessori Centre International and did 2.5 to 5 years old. I was very, very lucky. I had a husband who could afford to let me do this sort of study and send me off to England to do all my workshops and to do my exams. And we had a peculiar building, cottage in our property. It was called a pool bar. It was huge. God knows what they must have done in it. But anyway, and so we converted that into our school for our girls. So that was our Vadigidiki, which means in Shona, little people. So I must make the hand gesture like this, because if I do the hand gesture like that in Shona, that means I'm stopping their life, I'm stopping their growth. So you said go like that, you say little people. So Va being the person, Diki is small, Diki, so duplicated means very small people. So we started the school for our girls, and we were very lucky. There was a prison officer. He became an ex-prison officer because his business did so well, who loved to make our Montessori equipment. So all our Montessori equipment was made by him. Very beautiful. Some of it is still at Blue Gum Montessori. And we ran that for 15 years, learned a lot about running schools. I'd previously trained in hotel management, so management was easy enough for me. My husband was a chartered accountant. And then I was lucky enough to have a girl who'd gone to school with me 6 years behind. And she also trained in Montessori. She still does speak 5 different languages. So she joined me and her children joined. So yeah, and we took our children through 3 to 5, because in Zimbabwe, you go to school the year you turn 6. So we did 3 to 5.
Where did you get the math bead material?
The mathematics material?
Yeah, the bead.
So the bead material. Okay, difficult, because you know how expensive it is. And of course, we had very strict financial limitations on foreign currency. And so one of our parents, Dr. Aisha Ahmed, she made all our bead material. Her parents were Indian traders, and they managed to get the beads. And she made, as a doctor, she managed to make all our bead material and put it into our classroom for us. And that's still in Zimbabwe, still being used.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, if needs must, you know. And so our golden bead material, we had one of each, you know, units we had 50-bit, tens we made 50-bit, hundreds we had 100, and then we just had the wood. Thousands we had 1,000, and then we had the wooden cubes. which we just printed on the sides.
Yeah.
So yeah, it didn't bother the children. We would just say, here's the real one, can you imagine this? And they would do that. And the wooden blocks were quite expensive. Mr. Dutoy used to make them for us. So we found some lollies that came in a box exactly the same size as the cubes. And so we painted those brown, and they were just another step away from the 100 cubes. And that's how we did our bird's eye view. So it's just, yeah, finding ways to do it. And that was exactly the same as when I went onto the tea estate to help the ladies implement, not necessarily all Montessori, although I was trying to have them alter their way of thinking, because they were in the very much the factory mode where you have the children all chanting together and not actually feeling the number. And we just couldn't afford to put Montessori equipment into all those schools. So the carpentry shop that made stuff for the estate did them, and then we painted them. So they weren't nearly as beautiful as Neon House, but they still gave the impression of length and units, which is what we were looking for. And those ladies took supermarket bags, cut them up into thread, and crocheted them into the mats, the rectangular mats that children worked on. Yes, just amazing. Yeah. And they cooked the children's breakfast.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you can do Montessori anywhere, I guess, if you have the will.
It's more than just the will. I think you need to understand the theory behind it.
Yeah.
And that's what when I was thinking about this afternoon, and I was looking back, we were talking about having the children. It can be quite challenging working in a Montessori classroom now. And I was thinking, but why? They're still children. Well, the children watch a lot of digital, whatever it is. They're watching a lot of digital, and their imaginations are inspired by various things. And the parents will say, oh, well, you go to Montessori school, so just ask the teacher to do it. And I was thinking, well, okay, how does that work? So what the child does, just say they've been watching digital stuff, and they have this vast array of information, and they're light. And the last incident that came to mind was the child wanted to learn about rocks. And so the parent said, go and ask your teacher can do it. And so the teacher then, or the directress, looks at the child and thinks, okay, I'm here to serve the child. So, and I know I've got to do whole to part so the child can actually make sense of the topic. They're not just excited about the amethyst quartz. And how is it done? And how is it going to be done so it's child-driven and not teacher-driven? And if the teacher's not well enough trained to go through that process, it's going to be a teacher-driven process. And that is what worries me a lot in Montessori, because in the old days, the directress was the inspiration. I mean, I didn't have to contend with all the digital stuff. So whatever if I took out the timeline of life, the children all just flocked to do it with me. So I was the inspiration. I was driving it, and I knew, not driving it, but I was feeding it into the environment, and I had everything to support them. So now the modern directress, let's just go back to the rocks. So here we've got a child who's used to instant feedback, whether it's on the iPad or whatever, and minimal input from themselves. So they're not used to actually doing some painting of the dinosaur or making a pipe cleaner skeleton or things like that. So the director is going to go back. They're going to check if the classification of land and water is in place. They're going to look to see if the child has got some understanding of physical pressure. They're going to look to see if the child understands the effect of temperature and suspension of particles and in water and things like that. before they go into the formation of rocks. And very few classrooms are that highly equipped to cope with that in the 3 different levels. So say in 3 to 6 or 6 to 9 and 9 to 12, because you've got to have, you've got to be working in those grades of difficulty. And that's where I think there's a huge challenge for directors now.
Yeah. I guess what I was saying, what I meant was if you understand the philosophy and the method, you don't necessarily need a classroom full of expensive materials. You can do the method with materials that you find that you can make as well.
Yes. Oh yes, definitely. If you understand the concepts, yes, you can. But provided you don't have too many groups of children, I think that's where it can trip you up.
Yeah. So what do you think are the differences between children that you worked with in Zimbabwe and children that you worked with in Australia at Blue Gum and Casamere?
Okay, so I think to put it into context, there's the 25 years difference now, because I've been in this country 18 years. And in the interim time, I worked with the children on the tier state in the early years centres that were on the tier state. So please just keep that in mind. It's society, it's the environment. So I sort of wrote myself some notes. Many children go to childcare now. They don't spend the first 3 years with their mum at home. Both mum and dad have to work to be able to pay the mortgage. And I think that is a very real pressure on the entire family. Because what it does is it doesn't give time, it doesn't give quantity of time. And I don't think you can say, but I'm giving quality, because you can never judge when a child wants time. I think that's what's difficult. And nobody else is going to give the child as much time or such good quality as the parent. Although many parents nowadays lack confidence. And that was very obvious in the playgroup we got going at Casamere. We needed to put in a playgroup leader who could support the parents, because they just didn't have the confidence to do the work on their own. So that's a major one. There's time for repetition. Children do things once, twice, and then they move on to something else. And you need time for repetition, and I don't think they're getting that. They move from place to place. They go to school, they go to gymnastics, they go to tennis, they go to grandma, because of course there's transport, and transport's relatively cheap. So there's not a lot of time to form strong bonds with people. And I think that affects both the parents and the children. Parents don't have time to sleep.
You wrote that children in Australia have lots of overlays, and children in Africa have no overlays. What do you mean by that?
Well, the overlays being, so, and again, I'm saying 25 years, please remember that. The modern life is this, both parents need to work to pay the mortgage. Both parents are chasing a career, so they're putting their children into childcare. And that's not that childcare is bad. That is not what I'm saying. It's just that subtlety of difference. Because both parents are chasing their careers, chasing to pay the mortgage, there's no time for the parents to socialize with their own age. So what do? They create a social life with their child. And one of the things that I really become annoyed about is that because they're juggling so many balls, there's limited respect for the child's needs, because what they've got to do is they've got to put it all together. So that's really hard for the parents, and the child must fit in. That's what's going to happen. And they don't give the sort of thing. So principal's office is always near the gate as you're walking out, and you hear parents saying, "Now, what would you like for tea tonight?" Which sounds like a reasonable question to a 4 or 5-year-old. And the 5-year-old, just for example, says, "I would like sausages." And the parent says, "Sorry, we don't have sausages. You can have this." And for the child, that's hard. Why ask that question if you don't have the sausages in the first place? Parents need to say this or that. They're not dealing with another adult. So to have that abrupt change is very hard. So before they've even got to the school gate, they're having a meltdown. And it's the parent not understanding that they've got a wee child with them who is not able to make those sort of decisions. That child doesn't know what's in the fridge. That child doesn't know what's available. The child might even say, I want chips, and the parent says, no, we're not doing takeaway tonight. Well, that should have been said in the first breath, not after the child's made that decision. So I think what I'm seeing is the parents don't understand this is not a meeting of the equals. The parents are dominant. They are directing the child in the adult environment, and the children are not getting a chance to direct their own movement, to direct their hand while they're responding to the inner need. And so what's happening is they're limiting the development of their children. And so it's with movement, the children are in the cars. They're either in a pushchair or they're in they're in a car seat, and so they're not moving very much. But they don't get a lot of chance to move. Their parents' homes are beautiful. There'll be a playroom, but the playroom will be crammed with gifts and toys and everything. When I was doing the meeting with the parents, and I used to say to them, you need to, with your child, select 7 activities and put them into a container, and maybe 7 books or whatever. And those are the things for the week. The rest go into a cupboard, and the children work with those and learn to put those away. Then you're not going to end up with a huge fight. The children have got so much that the playroom is just full, and when they're asked to tidy up, as I would do if I was faced with that mess, they throw a tantrum. And then the parents say, oh, my child hasn't got regulation, but they're not helping the child develop regulation either. So it's, again, lack of understanding of the child, giving the child too much. And so they go on Saturdays and change over to another activity. They want to keep Lego out all the time. They keep Lego out all the time. And they can change their books. And that's what the cupboard is for. I just feel the parents don't understand that the children need a limitation of choice to be able to learn how to make a choice. They're not adults, but the parents treat them like adults. And I don't think, and that's where we begin to see these behaviors, which, in my opinion, and I'm not a psychologist, with the traumas we're seeing and the deviant behaviors we're seeing, it's a result of an interruption of repetition. It's a result of a lack of opportunity for movement. It's a result of lack of opportunity to make choice, which they can follow through with, and just overstimulation.
Yeah. So what do you think? What do you think are some effective ways to sync homes with Montessori classrooms?
Oh, Mark, I wish I knew that. I wish I knew that answer. So whenever I interviewed families coming in, I would give them the little talk I've given you, and I would also talk to them about incorporating real experiences into their children's lives. And they would sit there, and I would have examples, and I would have materials for them to work with, and they would sit there and say, yes, 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 because I'm now trying to make sure they understand what they're coming into. And I'm sure they mean well. I'm sure they do. I'm sure they want the best for their children. The time and commitment, and they're just running. They're running and chasing their tails to live the modern life, and they're exhausted. So they find it hard. I mean, I'll sit down and say to them, shoelaces. Children must be taught how to tie shoelaces. Children must be taught how to put on their clothes and how to put their shoes on. But of course, it's quicker for a parent to use Velcro shoes and put the clothes on. Cooking. Cook with your child. Observe the change of state of the egg. Name the states, liquid, solid, and what was the other one? Gas, if you can get rid of it. Measuring. Just give them a cup to measure with. Reading books. A number of parents don't read books. They have audiobooks. So there's no turning of the page. There's no question and discussion over things. There's no, but if this happened, what do you think the ending would be? We're just not seeing that.
Yeah.
Writing and communicating, and I always hold a pen in my hand and say, your child needs to see you hold a pen. Your child needs to see you writing. Because if you're always on the computer and always on your phone, when they come to us, they're not going to want to write because they don't see it.
Yeah,
They'll only want to do what their parents do. So they need to be modeling all the time. Things like birthday cards, invitations. So I was modeling that, and the staff were modeling that, so that we were sending written invitations and written birthday cards in the school for that reason. Gardening. What works? What doesn't work? It doesn't matter if the parents are not a gardener. If their parent kills every lettuce in the block, that's fine. The child's learning something from it. It's just necessary, and also necessary for a child to see a parent make a mistake, because that's the only way we learn. And children now are petrified to make mistakes. So that worries me a lot. This perfect society that never gets it wrong. I'm not going to do it because I'm terrible at it. You've got a child, you are going to do it, and you're going to give it a bash. Entertaining. People don't entertain at home. So children don't learn to tidy the house up, to set the table, to offer tea or coffee, or to offer things. They just don't learn. They don't learn how to please people and how to welcome people. And so that, our little thing of offering tea and a tray of something, it's just so important. You can't do that at a restaurant. There's just too many things. So my big thing, and I can't find the card. I think I left them at Casimir, shopping. Parents just don't shop for their children. And then I go through with the parents, the skills their children are going to learn. So getting some old cardboard, cutting out the junk mail. Today we need to buy apples and broccolini and lemons. So the child finds the card, you put them together, and off they go as an excursion, just to get those 3 items from the vegetable section and to measure them in the measuring scale and to pay with real cash and to go home and do something with them. And obviously then you're starting very small and you're building it up until eventually the child's got a wad of cards like that, but of course they're all muddled up. So this is another excursion. One parent is going to do the shopping, knowing it's going to take a good hour because they're going to go backwards and forwards. So what does the child learn from this? They learn it's necessary to map the supermarket. So from a very early age, a young child can map. And none of you ever thought about mapping a supermarket. But that's where it can start. Writing a list, because on my cards, the name of the item is written at the bottom. So eventually, just by look and say, the child learns that the word at the bottom is broccolini, and then they try to write it. When they've started writing at school, you'll find they'll start writing the list. So now they've got their own shopping list, and off they go with mum and dad to shop, or mum, one child. So weighing, calculating how much is. So our own children, because we use cash all the time, they needed to add up as we went around the supermarket and to the nearest 5 or 10 and tell me how much I'd spent. And then that was the cash I handed over. Because that can be done. At a very early age, the children can do that sort of thing. Handing over money and understanding you may not get change. That's a huge thing for a young child. They want the lolly and the money coming back. So the other thing I say to the parents is, one of our biggest problems in school is that children think that 50 cents is worth more than $2. So collect your bottle tops, all the same color, or your counters or whatever. On the first day, put down 5 cents and put down 5 counters. And this Casimir's got proper 1 cent coins, but we wouldn't have them. Go to a vegetable shop. What can you buy for 5 cents? It's going to be the smallest strawberry in the shop, I can tell you. You wink like crazy at the person behind the counter and hand over the 5 cents and take the strawberry. And the place at Bassendean got used to us doing this. This is what we did with the children. And of course, the next time you're going to do 10 cents. And that you will have in a straight line because we are a decimal system. And the parents are fascinated because they'll say to me, I'll do a 5 and a 5. And I say, no, you won't. You'll do a line of 10. Why? because we're on the decimal system. So the parents are learning at the same time, and it's just everyday stuff. Go shopping again. What can they buy for 10 cents? And that just carries on until they've got to the $2. And then they're able to cope with shopping with real money. At the moment, they just see a card. It means nothing. And we know that the NAPLAN results are telling us that the maths standards are dropping. I'm not surprised they're dropping. None of us remember our telephone numbers. Very few of us remember our bank details. We don't use money. Some people don't even know how much money they've got in the bank account. So you see, why should children learn about number?
Yeah, money has always been the most common traditional manipulative for learning maths.
Yeah.
Janet,
and
when
time is the other one.
Yes.
Yes.
When you migrated to Perth 18 years ago, you started working as a 6 and 9 teacher at Blue Gum, and then you worked as a directress and then a principal at Casamia. What advice do you have for new or inexperienced school leaders?
It's that big thing of starting beginning. I've just handed over to a young principal, ensuring the school values are in place and what they look like when they're translated into the school. So that is a discussion you need to be having with the board, and that's where the principal sits between the two and the staff. The board can't hand down values the staff can't deliver, and the staff equally can't demand things the board can't afford. So it's one of those things. Those have to be returned to every term. There's got to be ongoing discussion on the values. The school handbook, the code of conduct is very important now. Again, because times have changed and understanding of what a value is has probably changed quite a bit. I think when I'm particularly annoyed, you'll hear me say, I'm always going to stay in education, and I just love the aha moments when a child gets something. But next time I'm going to work in a church school, because I refuse to argue about values one more time. But it is facetious, because even in church schools, they have to have those discussions, and you have to keep going back to them. So that is something that's ongoing. Your internal professional development is key, absolutely key. Every single staff meeting, there must be a smidgen of internal professional development. Now, whether it's something the principal has seen when they're walking the halls, or it's something that I began to understand as we had not incorporated enough Aboriginal studies into our curriculum. And I mean incorporate, not layer, because very often those sort of topics tend to be layered on top. I mean, I got so excited. This is how childish I can be. I got so excited when I had worked out that the Aboriginals walked out of Africa into Asia, and then they separated out to the Philippines, and some sort of stayed down in Thailand and Bali or Indonesia, and the rest actually built a craft of some sort and did the 90 meters or so to come into Australia. I mean, and when I said to one of the Aboriginal children, I'm just blown away that your ancestors walked out of Africa. And you can see the child thinking, this lady's daft. But it's just an amazing thing. Don't you find it amazing?
Yeah. So
and when they walked here, sorry?
What you're talking about is this ongoing self-reflective process that's really important for schools that grow and develop.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think are the biggest challenges faced by Montessori in Australia?
Pressure from parents. Sorry?
How can we help Montessori spread in Australia further than it has?
Yeah. It's such a complex question, isn't it? there's Montessori in the early years, and I think we cover that very well, and parents understand we cover that well. Where the tensions come in place is in primary and secondary, because the parents will suddenly say, are they going to pass NAPLAN? And I'm thinking, just as well as at any other school, we're going to get very similar results to other school. If we're lucky, they're going to be superlative. If we're unlucky, they're not. Parents not understanding that the value of Montessori is not necessarily the academic results. The academic results are secondary, and the parents don't understand that.
Yeah. How can we change that, do you think?
Mark, I've been in Montessori for over 30 years. I can't give you that answer. We've had a couple of wins at Casimir, and Samantha will be able to give you them, where the family stayed with us for 9 years, and we went through some ups and downs, as one does. And then their children went off to state schools, not even other private schools, to state schools. And one of them, in my opinion, quite a tough school to go to, and came back and said, we cannot thank you enough for our child's strength of character. And we put it down to what happened at Casimir. And I mean, there were times when the parents thought that we were being, dare I use the word, callous, because we were on the sideline and watching and letting the child go through, ready to pick up if we needed to, but letting them get to the end and then ready to have the discussion. And I suppose that's my father's training in me as well, and me saying to my staff, let it be. We will go the journey with them, but we're going to be 50 meters away, as it were. And these two students, the reports we got back from the schools were just outstanding, how both of them had fantastic relationships with all generations, were able to sit quietly and to think about things and then go and ask the questions, say with project work and that, were very well organized with their time management. And if people think, how can Montessori children be well organized? Well, of course, you know, the 9 to 12, that's exactly what they're learning to do, is to organize themselves over a year, over a week. Brilliant public speakers. And the two of them were not necessarily our best public speakers, but they could get up and speak in public. And they could, they had resolution skills, which I was immensely proud of. So to me, those are the skills, and they were team players. Those are the skills I'd be looking for.
Do you think we need to be more proactive in advertising the benefits of Montessori to the general public?
There's a saying, isn't there? Those who can hear or whatever. It's difficult, Mark, because it is a lifestyle choice, isn't it?
Yeah.
And for many people to win is to have lots of money and to have a marvelous house. And it's not about feeling that they have satisfied something within themselves. So for many families, it's going to school is about getting a certificate or something like that. It's not an education.
Yeah.
That's
Does anybody else?
Our universities are.
Yeah. Do other participants, people listening here, have questions for Janet?
There's an iPhone 2. The lady, this lady here, I don't know her name. Mark, the person who comes up on my screen on iPhone 2, she's muted. I think she wants to ask a question. Or the lady with the glasses, if you just put into the chat there, I can answer through the chat.
Janet, did you when you were a teacher and a school principal, did you figure out an answer to the biggest problem of Montessori teachers, that work-life balance?
I ended up having to leave at sort of 4:30 myself each day for that very reason, because if you stay, your staff will stay. So I was very strict about gathering them all and saying, it is now time to go home. Go home, you can reflect over your cooking, or you can put a voice memo in, but you may not stay at school. Yeah. And same with the holidays, the days. Yeah.
What we've just done, my new principal with the first staff meeting on last Tuesday, he's not at work anymore because he's got COVID. I know, and very ill with it. He said, as of now, as of term 2, no one is to email anybody over the weekend unless it's urgent, and you're to stop emailing at 5. So for me, you know, I do a lot of emails over the weekend, so I then do all my emails because I've got a lot I'm tracking through. So I put them all in drafts, and then I got to work this morning, and around 8:39, after I'd sorted a few things out, pressed the send button. And it was incredibly liberating on the weekend because I opened my computer and there was nothing in my inbox. It made a really psychologically big difference that I didn't have that pressure to answer people. And it's retraining everybody. As you said, with leaving at 4:30, it's retraining everybody to not be available at all these ridiculous hours, and
so that was
your own personal life, and to work on your personal life and to nourish those that are around you. And I really commend Daniel to sort of like, this is a blanket. I don't want you emailing me after 5. That's it. And unless it's urgent. But I think we as working practitioners need to practice this because we're not nurturing ourselves. We're becoming all too available. And I think emails has really unraveled us in terms of our being able to think clearly about what we're doing, to realign and to go home and be at peace. There's no peace now with emails.
And so that was in our staff handbook and in the school handbook, that there was no emailing after 5. And if a teacher, and I was CC'd into all emails, so of course I could see if somebody was breaking the rule, as it were. And the teacher certainly would be spoken to about that, because you can guarantee that'll be the teacher will come to you and say, you know what, they spoke to me at whatever time. And so that nobody was allowed to email after 5. It had to be kept until the following day. There is a function on your Outlook, but I think like you, I like it in drafts so I can double check what I've said. So just in case I've been a little bit, exactly. That goes well. Yeah. And it's just, so I could be contacted by the parents out of school hours, but nobody else. Yeah. So keep that up. It's worth it, and it's worth it for the head.
And also I think it's really good to train parents in that too, because their normal jobs are around 9 to 5 or 8 till 6 or whatever, and they can email my staff at 7. I've got a number of new staff and they're just feeling incredibly overwhelmed, and they actually do need to go home and have time out and be with their new, one's recently got married, and she's like, Sarah Jane, I'm exhausted, I'm in bed at 8. And I'm like, oh my God, you're in your mid-20s, you shouldn't be in bed at 8.
Up there.
That's not right. But it's the stress of the job and answering everything. And I think if it comes from the top, Janet, if it comes from the principal down, and then the principal's practicing it, so they're not getting emails from the principal either till Monday morning, I think it's a really healthy way to go forward and to manage the IT component of our jobs.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that was another reason why I did there were 2 reasons. A lot of in-house professional development. One, so we could address things that we'd noticed during our staff meetings, things that needed to be addressed, just maybe something in the literacy program or the maths program, or even behaviors. But 2, because then the the staff could take turns in presentation, so upskilling themselves that way, but also we could bring in people and it's all done on site. They don't have to go and find somewhere else to go to do it. I just found that was very effective as well. And it was great team building. So that was another thing we used to do.
Janet, it's we're going to have to leave it there, but it's been such a pleasure talking to you. I wish we could continue, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. And welcome everybody, and goodbye everybody. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks, Janet. We'll have to have you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye.
Mark.